If you thought being a medieval queen was all crowns and comfort, well, let's just say, you might want to rethink that fantasy. You are not quite awake and not quite dreaming. The fire crackles in a hearth somewhere nearby, though it's not enough to warm the air. Your breath fogs gently, curling like ribbon. Candles blink like tired eyes along the chamber walls, their flames fat and slow. Outside, a medieval sky groans with clouds, gray, endless, and pressing. You can almost smell the cold. Moss, wool, wood smoke, and something vaguely like cabbage that's been boiled into submission. You're in a castle. Not a glamorous fairy tale spire, but the heavy, damp kind with walls 3 feet thick and drafts that move like ghosts. This is your home. This is your kingdom. And you are the queen. Though don't get too excited. The crown is more like a gilded trap. You wear it not because you won a game, but because you were born into someone else's endgame. You'll attend ceremonies. You'll bear heirs. You'll smile politely as men decide your fate from behind oak doors. The gown you wear is stiff, layers upon layers, stitched with gold thread and silence. It itches. There's probably a squirrel in the hem, but you're too dignified to check. A maid bows. She's young and already tired. She says it's time. You sigh. Today is another day of diplomacy and duty, which, spoiler alert, you probably won't make it through. But before we dive in, a gentle whisper. If you're enjoying this quiet little journey through uncomfortable history, feel free to like and subscribe. No need to ring any bells, just be here. Share your time. Maybe even drop a comment with your current location and what time you're listening. It's oddly comforting to know who else is drifting through the centuries with us. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. It begins in a cold hallway, under tapestries so dusty the threads barely show their knights and saints anymore. The stone beneath your slippers is uneven, older than your father's father, and probably someone's great-grandfather's goat. You walk slowly, which is partly for effect and partly because you're wearing shoes shaped like pointy boats. Your ladies-in-waiting trail behind you like nervous ducklings. They speak in whispers, mostly about you. It's fine. Let them. In the great hall, a gathering is already forming. Lords with mustaches sharp enough to slice bread. Bishops who smell like myrrh and mild disapproval. And scribes, bent over their scrolls like worried spiders. You take your place at the high table, not at the center, but slightly left, just far enough to remind everyone that your presence is symbolic. You smile. You nod. You resist the urge to yawn. Breakfast is served. Stale bread, bitter greens, and a broth that tastes like boiled ambition. You pretend to eat. Queens are expected to be composed, not hungry. Across from you sits your husband, the king. He's older than you. He's older than your oldest uncle. He's explaining something about tax levies with the enthusiasm of a man describing his coin collection in real time. You nod again. That's your job. Major historical fact. Most medieval queens had little to no direct political power. They served primarily to secure alliances and produce heirs. Obscure tidbit. One queen reportedly trained her pet monkey to fetch embroidery supplies during court ceremonies. He wore a little velvet cap. Scholarly uncertainty. Historians still debate whether Queen Elfrith truly plotted her stepson's death, or simply got tired of living in a castle full of men who didn't let her speak. The hall begins to thin out. Morning audiences are over. You rise, your spine perfectly straight, even as the pins in your hair begin their slow revolt. Somewhere a dog barks. You wish you were that dog. You step into the solar, a chamber meant for sunlight but mostly known for its persistent chill and a view of the courtyard's most mediocre tree. Your ladies arrive with their embroidery frames like it's a military drill. You take your seat by the window and begin stitching the Holy Virgin's sleeve for the third time this week. You suspect you're making it worse. One of the younger girls giggles. Another coughs. You all pretend not to hear either. The wind scratches at the windows, and you pause to look outside. Below, two squires are practicing swordplay in the mud. One of them slips, lands hard, and laughs like it didn't hurt. You envy that freedom, to fall publicly and feel joy. Then, of course, there's the steward. He arrives, as always, with his ledger and the quiet panic of a man who's seen too many kitchen fires and not enough garlic. "Your Grace," he says, eyes lowered. "The cook has requested more leeks." You blink. More leeks. This is your power now. To approve vegetables. You wave a hand. You imagine he will write about this in his nightly log. Queen mercifully permits leeks. The next hour passes in the rhythm of needle and silence. Someone sneezes. The fire hisses. You think about your sister, married off to a duke in the south. She wrote once about how the lemons there made her teeth ache. You haven't heard from her in months. A knock at the door. The priest. He bows low and asks if you would like to review the chapel tapestries for possible heresy. You say yes, mostly because it's a change of scenery. You walk the hall again. Remember the uneven stones from earlier? Still uneven. But now, a faint scent of lavender floats in the air. Someone's perfume, or perhaps just hope. The chapel is cold. A fresco peels slightly near the arch. The Virgin Mary looks especially judgmental today. You nod at everything the priest says. He points out a lamb that might resemble a griffin if you squint. He's nervous about it. You tell him it's lovely. Major historical fact. Many queens were expected to oversee religious education and the visual integrity of sacred art in their courts. Obscure tidbit. Some nobles believed sneezes were a sign of moral weakness, especially during prayer. Scholarly uncertainty. There's debate about whether Queen Matilda of Scotland actually commissioned embroidered liturgical robes, or whether her ladies simply attributed their work to her out of loyalty. Back in your room, you let out the smallest sigh. Just enough to fog the window. You wonder if anyone noticed you didn't speak for almost the entire afternoon. Probably not. But that, too, is power. You wake before dawn, though you never really slept. The castle breathes with creaks and clicks. Stone cooling, wood settling, servants stirring like whispers. Outside, a rooster shouts with the misplaced confidence of someone who hasn't seen the cloud cover. You lie still for a while, tracing the cracks in the ceiling. One looks like a rabbit. Another might be a saint if you're generous. You imagine what it would feel like to just keep lying there all day, not getting up, not performing queen. But of course you rise, because there are layers of fabric waiting to swaddle you into personhood again. Your maid enters quietly, a bundle of wool and linen in her arms. She says nothing. She doesn't need to. She's done this 100 times. Wrapped your body in meaning until it disappears. Corset, kirtle, gown, surcoat, sleeves wide enough to store bread in. You blink as your hair is twisted, braided, pinned like a battle plan. A final comb of rosemary oil, and you're ready to appear both humble and superior. A delicate balancing act. You walk again because queens always walk. No one mentions how much of royalty is simply moving from one cold chair to another. Today's walk takes you to the weeping chamber. Yes, it's really called that. It's not for you, of course. It's for noble women mourning dead sons, or rehearsing sorrow in case their husbands go to war again. You visit to show sympathy, not sadness. A countess sobs behind a curtain. You place a gloved hand on her shoulder and murmur something soothing. You do not cry. Queens don't cry unless it's politically advantageous. You leave her with a gift basket of preserved pears and the mild illusion of hope. Major historical fact. Medieval queens were expected to perform public displays of compassion, especially toward noble women and grieving families. Obscure tidbit. Some royal courts kept small mourning dogs, tiny lap hounds dressed in black cloth, to accompany widows in formal grieving rituals. Scholarly uncertainty. Historians still argue whether these grief performances were entirely scripted, or if some queens used them to carve out emotional agency. You pass through a garden that hasn't seen real sun in weeks. The rosemary has turned gray-green, and the lavender just looks like regret. A gardener bows, spade in hand. He says nothing either. Nobody wants to disturb your grief face. Back in your solar, the fire has been lit. Someone has left a new embroidery hoop on your seat. The Virgin again. This time riding a cloud like she's late for something. You sigh. You pick up the needle. You keep going. You're summoned. Again. The steward appears with a scroll and the faint look of a man who hasn't sat down since sunrise. His Grace requests your presence in the council chamber, he says. You nod. You adjust your veil. You consider asking what it's about, then decide it doesn't matter. Queens attend. They don't inquire. The council chamber smells like damp parchment and warmed ink. A brazier glows dimly in the corner, trying its best. The king is already seated, surrounded by advisors who all look like they were carved from the same tired tree. You sit. They pretend not to be surprised. Today's topic, grain. More specifically, the price of grain, the storage of grain, the potential for grain theft, and whether the Duke of Northwithershire, you're not entirely sure that's a real place, is hoarding it out of spite. You listen because it is expected. You nod because it is necessary. Then, unexpectedly, the king turns to you. What say you, my queen? You freeze. Momentarily, and then you say, perhaps, if we stored grain in barrels instead of sacks, we might discourage mice and thieves alike? There is a pause, then a murmur of approval. One of the advisors actually smiles. Someone writes it down. You've done it. You've contributed. The meeting continues, but you don't hear much after that. You are silently planning a barrel-based grain empire. Afterward, in the corridor, your lady-in-waiting beams at you like you've just jousted a dragon. You were magnificent, she whispers. You smile. You were adequate. Major historical fact. Queens were occasionally consulted in councils, particularly during times of crisis or famine, but their voices were still considered supplemental. Obscure tidbit. Some queens kept private notebooks of political observations, hidden among their prayer books. Scholarly uncertainty. Whether Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine truly influenced grain law reforms, or whether chroniclers exaggerated her role to flatter her memory, is still contested. That evening you're offered mulled wine with your supper. A rare treat. You savor it slowly, letting the spices sting your tongue. You stare into the fire. Somewhere deep inside, you imagine a version of yourself in a simpler life. Maybe baking bread, maybe reading forbidden poetry in a hidden nook. But that's not your life. Your life is here. Velvet, veils, and politics disguised as embroidery. Still, tonight feels different. Tonight you were heard, even if it was just about barrels. You wake again to bells, distant, mournful, and offbeat, as if even time itself has a limp today. The bed is still warm, but the air beyond the canopy feels like a personal affront. You press your hand to the embroidered coverlet, half hoping someone might declare the day cancelled. But no, that's not how queening works. You rise. Again. This time, the morning ritual includes the fitting of a ceremonial mantle so heavy it feels like you're wearing a rug tied with pearls. The lady's hands are careful, but her face remains expressionless. You know she's counting how many days until she can go home for Lent. You almost envy her. There's a guest arriving today, an ambassador, from the kingdom across the sea, which means you're required to be radiant, articulate, and incapable of sneezing. The great hall is already buzzing when you arrive. Candles flicker in iron rings overhead. The air smells like salted meat and anxiety. You take your seat beside the king and smile, the kind of smile that makes your face hurt after 10 seconds. The ambassador bows low. He is wearing far too much silk for a man with that much facial hair. He presents gifts. A carved box of foreign sweets, a falcon with mood issues, and a robe woven in a pattern you can't stop staring at. It looks like someone spilled stars across night-colored fabric. You thank him gracefully. You accept the falcon like it won't try to claw anyone before sundown. Then comes the diplomacy. You speak carefully, each sentence like balancing eggs on a tilted tray. You're fluent in 3 languages, but pretending to be humble in all of them is a special kind of performance. Eventually, the ambassador comments on your embroidery. You show him the Virgin riding her cloud. He blinks, nods, changes the subject to fish trade. Major historical fact. Medieval queens were often central to diplomatic engagements, especially when peace required a soft touch or a veiled threat. Obscure tidbit. It was considered a subtle insult to gift a queen-dyed fabric that faded easily. an underhanded way of implying impermanence. Scholarly uncertainty. Some letters between royal courts read suspiciously like flirtations. Historians still debate how much was politics and how much was personality. After the meal, you slip away to the cloister walk. Place for quiet, for pacing, for eavesdropping occasionally. The stone underfoot is damp, moss curling into the cracks like sleepy green calligraphy. You trail your fingers along the cold columns and think about the robe, the one with stars. You wonder if they did that on purpose. Give you a gift you couldn't stop thinking about. You wonder how many gifts in your life have actually been strategies. You wonder how often you've done the same. Later, you find yourself in the Queen's Chapel. Not because you're devout necessarily. More because it's the only room in the castle that doesn't echo with expectation. Candles drip silently in sconces shaped like vines. The glass in the windows has gone gray with weather. You sit alone in the front pew. Sometimes you pretend you're invisible here. You whisper a prayer, but it's more like a confession of exhaustion. A soft please, to no one in particular. Please let tomorrow be quieter. Please let the falcon survive the night. Please let me feel like I belong in my own story. The priest passes by without speaking. He knows better. You think he might be your favorite person in the castle. Later, in the Queen's study, you find the ledger waiting. Yes, the ledger. The one with the tiny ink columns and margin notes in 6 different hands. Tracks dowries, debt, gift-giving, and the peculiar disappearance of a goat from the lower meadow. You spend an hour reviewing it. You learn more about your kingdom from that ledger than you do from half the council meetings. You note the rise in honey consumption and consider whether a bee shortage is coming. Major historical fact: many medieval queens managed estate accounts personally and were trained in arithmetic, budgeting, and sometimes even land law. Obscure tidbit: some queens devised personal ciphers to keep private notes hidden in the margins of public ledgers. Scholarly uncertainty. It's unclear whether these cryptic notes were used to manage secret alliances or just vent frustrations about chicken theft. You finish with cramped fingers and ink on your sleeve. Evening comes. The falcon, surprisingly, is still alive. Someone names him Eustace. You don't know why, but it fits. You retire early, or try to. Your room is colder tonight. The fire hasn't caught properly. The candles flicker like they've got stage fright. You wrap yourself in every blanket available and listen to the quiet. It's the kind of quiet that rings in your ears, like your brain is trying to fill the silence with leftover thoughts. You think about grain barrels, star-patterned robes, faded dye, and the fact that tomorrow you'll rise again. Because queens don't sleep in, not even when they desperately want to. The morning fog has the texture of cold wool and the taste of last night's smoke. You wake slowly, unsure if it's dawn or just your chamber walls tricking you again. The stone doesn't glow so much as sulk with light. You've forgotten what sunlight looks like unfiltered. Today's first duty is a ceremony. Not a grand one, no gold threads or dancing peasants. Just the blessing of a new bell for the abbey. Still, that means riding out, in public, with people, while smiling. You sit for your hair. Today it's being wound in soft coils across your head like a cautious snake, pinned into place with little knives disguised as pearls. One pin jabs a nerve near your temple, and for a moment, you imagine quietly retiring from public life and becoming a potter. But queens don't pot. They ride. You mount side saddle with practiced grace, though your knees would rather be anywhere else. The procession is slow and ceremonial, a parade of discomfort. Villagers gather as you pass. Children wave. A goat bleats at your horse. Your smile is perfect. The countryside unfolds like a storybook drawn by someone who's never seen real mud. Thatched roofs, chimney smoke, puddles large enough to qualify as ponds. You count the ducks. Eventually, you reach the abbey. The new bell is suspended by a wooden frame, half draped in cloth. It gleams with fresh metal and the threat of bad weather. The abbot greets you with a bow so low you worry for his spine. You nod and prepare to say something ceremonial, something reverent. Instead, your voice cracks halfway through blessing, and you end up sounding like a pub singer after 3 Alesh. Nobody minds. Major historical fact: queens were often patrons of abbeys and churches, not just for spiritual reasons, but to reinforce political alliances with the church. Obscure tidbit: some abbey bells were cast using old swords and armor. Metal that had seen sin now used to call people to prayer. Scholarly uncertainty: it's unclear whether the dedication rituals for bells were always public. Some records suggest secret night ceremonies involving only women. As the bell rings for the first time, you feel it in your chest. A deep, resonant tone that hums behind your ribs. The villagers clap. The abbot beams. A nun discreetly wipes a tear. You ride back in silence. Your guard offers to tell you a joke. You decline with a smile. You're not ready for joy with a punchline. Back at court, the air has changed. Not literally, it still smells like burnt tallow and ambition, but something feels sharper. A letter has arrived. Not just any letter. A seal you recognize. A wax symbol you haven't seen in 2 years. The handwriting is your sister's. She writes from another court, another world. A colder one, politically and meteorologically. Her words are elegant, restrained. You know what's between them. Her husband is difficult. Her children are frequently sick. She misses the bread from home and the way the hall used to echo when you danced after banquets. She signs it. May your burdens be light, dear sister, and may your silks stay unfaded. It nearly undoes you. You spend the afternoon in the solar, pretending to do tapestry work. The wool refuses to behave. Your needle pricks your finger twice like it has opinions about your technique. A visiting countess joins you. She discusses falconry, upcoming feast seating, and whether you think pale green is a flattering color for women over 30. You murmur something non-committal and add 3 blue stitches where red was required. She doesn't notice. Major historical fact: queens often maintained correspondence with their sisters and female relatives across Europe. These letters now form crucial archives of women's inner lives. Obscure tidbit: Some noblewomen used flower-based code in letters. A sketch of lavender, for example, might mean longing. Poppies could mean loss or sleep. Scholarly uncertainty. It's debated whether these codes were widespread or simply playful flourishes for amusement. As the sun sinks, you light a lamp early, not because it's dark, but because you want the light to feel like your choice. Dinner is quiet. The king is away hunting. You eat slowly, savoring each bite of overcooked goose like it's a conversation you don't have to respond to. Later, in your chamber, you take out the letter again. You run your fingers over the parchment. There's a small smudge of something at the bottom. Ink? Flour? A fingerprint from far away. You fold it carefully. You tuck it into a small carved box behind your combs. You sleep restlessly. You dream of bells made of armor and sisters who send coated flowers across borders. And in the dream, you understand all of it. The sun arrives late again, and only because it's obligated. You rise with less enthusiasm than your maid, who is humming a song about eggs. You make a mental note to find out where she's storing this optimism and whether it can be taxed. There's a delegation in court today. That phrase should conjure excitement, maybe even the faintest sense of purpose. Instead, it brings the familiar ache between your shoulder blades. Not pain exactly, just diplomacy. You're seated in the receiving chamber by mid-morning. The chair beneath you is technically a throne, but it feels like sitting on architecture. Everything about it demands posture and promises splinters. The visiting nobles arrive with practiced grandeur. Swishing cloaks, jeweled belts, smiles that don't quite reach the eyes. They bow. You nod. The conversation begins predictably. Land disputes, river rights, a merchant who may or may not have insulted someone's goat. You murmur approval, ask 2 questions, and then subtly gesture for the steward to speak on your behalf. Queens don't need to drown in logistics, just float above them, like a very polite cloud. A tray of delicate pastries arrives. You pick one that looks like it wants to be a swan. Tastes like regret and flour. Major historical fact: royal courts often served as both administrative centers and theaters of politics. Queens were expected to represent dignity and unity, even when excluded from direct power. Obscure tidbit: some medieval queens used scent as subtle diplomacy, wearing rare imported perfumes to signal wealth and status during tense negotiations. Scholarly uncertainty. Some records hint that certain queens hid coded messages inside embroidery gifted to diplomats, but no such examples have survived. Midday blurs. You're offered a small gift from the visitors, a carved box of dried figs and something claiming to be saffron. You smile graciously. You plan to re-gift it to the abbess next week. The final pleasantries are exchanged like overused coins. Bows, smiles, exit. You're left in the echo of the hall. You resist the urge to slouch, but only just. Pageboy sneezes in the corridor. You envy his freedom. Later, you escape to the gardens. They're not particularly lush right now. It's too early in the season for real blooms. But the air smells of wet soil and moss, which is better than wax and flattery. You walk slowly, fingers grazing hedges. A robin hops along a low wall beside you. You decide not to name it. You've made that mistake before. At the edge of the path, you find her. The old herbalist who's lived on the grounds longer than most of your courtiers have been alive. She's kneeling in the damp, coaxing something green from under a cloche of glass. You crouch beside her, despite your shoes' protests. She tells you the plant is woundwort, good for bruises and humility. You ask her why it always grows near nettles. She shrugs. Some things thrive near pain. You don't know whether she's talking about plants anymore. Major historical fact: many queens cultivated herb gardens within castle walls, used for medicine, cooking, and sometimes quiet escape from court life. Obscure tidbit: woundwort was believed not only to heal skin, but to protect the soul from emotional disquiet. Scholarly uncertainty: historians still debate whether certain castle gardens were designed with symbolic layouts, miniature representations of heaven or social order, or secret religious iconography. You thank the herbalist. She nods without looking up, still patting the earth like it's a child she's putting to bed. Back in your chamber, you find a scroll of music has been delivered. A new composition from a traveling musician. You don't recognize the name, but the parchment smells faintly of juniper. You unroll it and begin to hum, just softly, just for you. The melody stumbles at first, then finds its footing. Outside, rain begins, light, insistent, drumming on the shutters like a memory trying to get in. You hum louder. The next morning starts with a headache. Not the dramatic storybook kind. The sort from too many candles, too little ventilation, and a very long evening spent listening to noble women argue over the embroidery guild's taxes. They speak in syllables that feel stitched directly into your skull. You drink something bitter from a pewter cup. The healer claims it's ground willow bark. You suspect it's ground optimism and regret. Your lady-in-waiting asks what dress you'll wear for the cathedral procession. You blink. Ah, yes. The bishop's feast day. A solemn occasion filled with very solemn bread and even more solemn incense. You choose the deep blue gown. It makes you look less tired, or at least tired with purpose. You're ushered to the cathedral under a sky that can't decide between drizzle and sulk. Inside, light pours through the stained glass like liquid sermon. You breathe it in, not because you're devout exactly, but because churches are quiet, and quiet is holy in ways beyond doctrine. The bishop greets you with an overly floral blessing. You nod as though you understand Latin. Major historical fact: royal women were often paraded during religious ceremonies to represent the moral virtue and piety of the realm, reinforcing divine authority through visual pageantry. Obscure tidbit: some medieval queens embroidered hidden prayers into their hems. Tiny words for protection, stitched in thread no one else would ever see. Scholarly uncertainty: it's still debated whether these private prayers were meant for God, for memory, or simply to pass the time during hours-long ceremonies. The sermon begins. You lose the thread somewhere between suffering and grace. You watch a pigeon land on the rafters above the altar, utterly unbothered by salvation. The bread is passed. The ceremonial, yes, but also very dry. You take a sip of wine and wish it were stronger. You walk home slowly. The streets smell of wet stone and chimney smoke. A child offers you a daisy through a garden gate. You take it. You keep it. That night, you press the flower between 2 pages of your personal psalter, just beneath a passage about job. Irony not intended, but not unwelcome. Your sleep is shallow and littered with vague dreams. Doors you can't open. Halls that echo with your name spoken in voices you almost remember. You wake just before dawn. The castle is still, wrapped in the thick hush of pre-morning. You dress without help. A simpler gown, no corset. Freedom in small fabric rebellions. In the kitchen, you find the baker already kneading dough. He nods at you, surprised but not alarmed. Queens don't usually wander in before sunup. You ask if you can help. He shrugs. Only if you know how to braid. You do. Or at least you remember enough from childhood to fake it. So, there you are at a cold stone counter, your fingers dusted in flour, weaving dough into something resembling a loaf. The baker doesn't speak much. He just watches, approving. There's something sacred about bread. The weight of it. The heat it holds. The way it asks nothing and gives everything. Major historical fact. Bread was the cornerstone of the medieval diet, often making up 70 to 80% of caloric intake for both rich and poor. Royal kitchens baked daily with different grades for different ranks. Obscure tidbit. Some queens had their own symbolic bread stamps, used to mark loaves destined for donation, almsgiving, or rituals. Scholarly uncertainty. A few accounts suggest that early morning baking was a quiet retreat for at least one medieval queen, but the details are frustratingly vague. You eat a crust still warm from the oven. It burns your fingertips and you don't mind. Later, your lady-in-waiting finds you back in your room, hair loose, smelling faintly of yeast. She blinks, trying to decide if she dreamt you up. You tell her you're canceling the embroidery circle. Instead, you read. You read an old fable about a fox who outwits a king. You smile. Somewhere in the garden, the robin returns. Still unnamed. Still free. It's official. The ambassador from Aquitaine has arrived, and he's brought chaos in silk shoes. You're told to wear your gold-stitched gown and your heavy jeweled circlet. You're also told to smile, even though the last time you smiled at a diplomat, it ended in a trade agreement that nobody liked and a 5-year wine shortage. The receiving hall smells like honeyed almonds and ambition. Your husband speaks in carefully measured Latin. The ambassador replies in a French dialect that even the translator squints at. You don't bother hiding your yawn. He presents gifts. Dyed tapestries, delicate ivory combs, and, of course, a falcon in a velvet hood. You nod politely. The falcon looks bored. You whisper to your lady-in-waiting, I give it 3 days before that bird bites someone important. She bets too. Major historical fact. Political diplomacy in the medieval era often involved extravagant gift-giving. Hawks, horses, relics, and spices were all common, meant to impress and intimidate in equal measure. Obscure tidbit. In some courts, The falcon's behavior was considered an omen for the success of negotiations. If it screeched or defecated mid-ceremony, people took it personally. Scholarly uncertainty. There's debate among historians whether 12th century Queen's alliance collapsed because of failed diplomacy, or because her gift hawk maimed the rival court's jester. No one quite agrees. You're seated next to the ambassador at the evening banquet. He asks you about the castle stonework. You tell him it's very vertical. He blinks, then laughs. You weren't joking. By dessert, almond custard and pear slices, you're pretending to be interested in regional shipping routes. He's pretending to understand your accent. You make it through the night by counting ceiling beams and mentally dressing your least favorite cousin as a goat. At least the falcon is quiet. For now. The next morning, a procession winds into the courtyard. Pilgrims, dusty and sun-flushed, singing off-key and carrying wooden staves wrapped in ribbon. You watch from your window at first. Then you descend, drawn not by duty but by curiosity. Pilgrims are strange, chaotic things, part prayer, part party, part plague vector. They carry stories like lice, contagious, persistent, and just a little itchy. One woman offers you a woven charm made of grass. She says it's for safe sleep. You accept it because you understand the value of bedtime superstition. Later, you pin it to your bedpost, just in case. Major historical fact: pilgrimage was common across social classes, seen as a physical and spiritual journey toward penance or healing. Royalty occasionally sponsored pilgrim groups for political or religious goodwill. Obscure tidbit: some pilgrims slept on bramble mats or under animal skins to mimic the hardships of saints, though many quietly upgraded to inns once no one was watching. Scholarly uncertainty. Some scholars believe royal courts allowed pilgrim access mainly for public relations, while others argue it served to reaffirm divine hierarchy through contrast. Clean queen, dusty penitent. That night, you light a candle and trace the charm's knots with your finger. It smells faintly of sun-warmed straw and sweat. Your bed creaks. The wind presses at the shutters like a cat wanting in. You close your eyes. In your dream, you're walking barefoot through fields stitched with dandelions. A pilgrim waves from a distant hill. She looks exactly like you, only older, only calmer. You wave back. She nods and vanishes. You wake just before the bell rings. There's flour under your nails again, even though you haven't baked in days. The charm on your bedpost trembles just slightly. You don't mention it. You simply smile, stretch, and wonder how much longer the ambassador plans to stay. It rains this morning, slow and apologetic. The kind of rain that taps the stone gently, like a servant unsure whether to knock again. You sit by the window in your dressing gown, sipping broth from a silver cup that once belonged to your great-aunt, the one who claimed she'd seen angels in her tea steam. She may have been exaggerating, but on quiet days like this you sort of understand. The court is quieter than usual. The ambassador has finally left, without the falcon, which now lives in the West Tower and refuses to bond with anyone except a kitchen maid named Gerda. Naturally, your husband has retreated to the chapel. The steward is muttering about missing beeswax again. And your most urgent duty today is embroidery. Specifically, a depiction of Saint Agnes with hair like coiled cinnamon bread. You are admittedly not good at embroidery. Your Agnes looks slightly furious. You leave her be. Major historical fact. Queens were often expected to display virtue and refinement through needlework. Embroidery wasn't just domestic. It was political, devotional, and sometimes even encrypted with hidden symbols. Obscure tidbit. In at least one case, a queen allegedly stitched a miniature donkey into the corner of her tapestry to mock a rival court that gifted her sour cheese. Scholarly uncertainty. Historians debate whether surviving queenly embroidery was truly done by royal hands or whether skilled maidservants finished the work behind palace doors. As always, attribution gets murky. The storm builds into a soft drumming. You hum under your breath, something your nursemaid used to sing, long before you wore silk and learned how to eat cherries with a knife. By candlelight, you finish your thread work. Saint Agnes still looks miffed, but she's clothed. Counts. That night, the fire flickers, the shutters rattle, and a black cat curls on the hearth as if it owns the castle. You lie back on linen sheets. Above you, the canopy is stitched with gold thread. Your last waking thought. You've survived another day in a world not built for women, in a palace not shaped for softness, under a crown that pinches even when it sparkles. But still, you lived it, and somehow, beautifully, that's enough. Final wind down. The fire's low now. Only the occasional pop of sapwood breaks the hush. Stone walls breathe in the dark. Cool, familiar, comforting. You are wrapped in linen and wool, the soft weight of sleep already gathering at your elbows. Outside, the rain has faded to mist. The courtyard pools glow dimly under moonlight, like forgotten mirrors. Somewhere in the west tower, the falcon stirs, feathers rustling in its sleep. Gerda hums as she tidies the kitchen, just a melody, almost lost to the crackle of the hearth. Your chamber smells of lavender sachets and old books. The embroidered Agnes watches from her tapestry perch, still judging, but a little less sharply now. You breathe, and again, each breath slower than the last, like waves lapping against the memory of a shoreline. You've walked through a castle full of rituals and echoes. You've heard the bells, felt the crown press behind your eyes, watched court politics bloom and wilt in a single afternoon. You've been queen not in glory, but in endurance. Not in privilege, but in presence. And now you rest. Let the candle flicker out. Let the voices of history settle into soft whispers beneath the bed. Let the crown slip just for tonight. Sleep, steady and slow, takes your hand. You follow. The castle will wait. The falcon will keep. And in the hush that follows, beneath embroidered saints and watchful stone angels, a medieval queen finally drifts into the dark. Not alone, not forgotten, just asleep.